oversight powers.
That is certainly the president's attitude. It's not the job of Congress to do oversight, period. And indeed, under the GOP Congress, they did no oversight. But it's our responsibility to root out fraud, corruption, waste, abuse, whether it rises to the level of criminality or not.
Joining me now is Mehdi Hasan, columnist at The Intercept and host of Upfront on Al Jazeera English. Natasha Bertrand, staff writer at The Atlantic. Dana Milbank, Washington Post columnist. And Naveed Jamali, former FBI double agent. Thank you all for being here. Mehdi, let's start with Jay Sekulow. We played a little bit of him at the top of the show. He was on ABC this morning, and he was asked if he's worried that the report itself might be more damaging than the Barr memo indicates. Take a listen.
In General Barr's letter, he said, I'm only going to discuss the principal conclusions. And what were those principal conclusions? No obstruction, no collusion. They probably had legitimate disagreements inside the Department of Justice on how things should move forward one way or another. And the fact is that, obstruction by tweet, which was one of the theories being advocated here, I never took as a basis for obstruction. And by the way, neither did the special counsel, evidently, because their report says they're not making that conclusion, and they said difficult questions of law and fact. And when you have difficult questions of law and fact, you know what you don't do? You don't recommend prosecution.
Mehdi, should that be enough for the American people?
No, Joy, of course not. It shouldn't be enough for the American people. It's just a lie when he says the report says that. The whole point is, Joy, as you mentioned, and I was on your show a couple of weeks ago when we were discussing all this, we still haven't seen the report. Congress hasn't seen the report. The President of the United States says he hasn't seen the report that apparently is a total and complete exoneration. Isn't it weird that for 2 weeks we've been told this report exonerates a president, it's time to move on, yet you can't see the report? That is a weird, weird position for any politician to take. If I've been accused for years in a false witch hunt hoax, fake dossier investigation for 2 years, and then I get a report that says I'm cleared, the thing I'm going to want to do most is release that report. The fact that they don't want to release that report fits in with everything else we've seen over the last few years, which is they lie and cover up and never explain why they're lying and covering up if there's nothing to cover up and nothing to lie about.
Yeah, and Natasha, the challenge here is that the Democrats who are demanding to see this report are already quite dubious about whether or not the Barr memo corresponds precisely with what's in the Mueller report. Yesterday I spoke with Jim Clyburn, who's in leadership. He's the House Majority Whip, and he expressed quite a bit of skepticism about whether the Mueller report matches precisely what William Barr has put out. Take a listen. Do you suspect that he's withholding damaging information that's in the Mueller report in order to protect Donald Trump?
That's my suspicion.
In your reporting, Natasha, how far are the Democrats prepared to go to ensure that the American people ultimately get to see the full report, all of what was concluded by Robert Mueller's team?
Very far, Joy. I mean, I think that this is a fight that they are willing to take right to the end. They want the grand jury material. They want the classified information. They want everything, and that's so that they can ultimately put something out to the American public, whether it is a redacted version of the Mueller report, which will have to be redacted in some ways because of classified information, of course, or a summary prepared by Congress that can be used for public consumption. They want these findings and ultimately the meat of the Mueller report, not just the conclusions, to be released. But I think, if we're to believe the Washington Post, the New York Times, NBC News, all these reports that have been put out in the last week about the displeasure that's being felt by Mueller's team over how Barr characterized this report, then I think it would be fair to call this a cover-up. I mean, the fact that Mueller's team has been silent for 2 years, and now they're speaking to associates who are then speaking to reporters about how they believe that Barr really mischaracterized the fundamental findings of their 2-year investigation, then that is something that should really concern everyone, because Barr was remember, he was put in this position after he wrote a lengthy memo outlining his belief that the president did not obstruct justice, that the obstruction of justice probe was fatally misconceived. He interviewed to be the president's personal attorney in the Russia investigation. This is someone who is deeply, deeply conflicted, and he's not alone, of course. Rod Rosenstein, the deputy attorney general, is very conflicted as well, and he had a role to play in also exonerating the president of obstruction, even though he helped write the underlying memo that fired James Comey, that was used by Trump to fire Jim Comey, thereby making him a witness in the obstruction probe. So you just have so many conflicts of interest here that fundamentally, really compromise compromise their ability to put something out into the public that the American people can actually hold on to and believe in.
Yeah, and and Dana Milbank, typically with this administration, you don't really have to guess what they think because Donald Trump just tells you what they think. Like he just emotes whatever it is that he's concerned about. And if he was confident in the Mueller report, then why is he lashing out against it? If he's confident that he's exonerated by it, then why do we have this reporting? Politico, Trump lashes out at Mueller probe as release of report approaches. Quote, as William Barr's self-imposed deadline to submit a copy of Mueller's report to Capitol Hill fast approaches, Trump's confidence in its complete and total exoneration of him has waned, according to one Republican close to the White House. He wouldn't be bringing this up still if everything was hunky-dory. Meanwhile, other reporting, New York Times, Congress waits as Bill Barr blacks out parts of the Mueller report. Quote, since Mr. Mueller submitted a nearly 400-page report on his investigation 2 weeks ago, Mr. Barr, his aides, and other law enforcement officials have been reviewing it to determine which portions to provide to lawmakers and the public and what to black out. So the man who went in saying he didn't believe the Mueller report, that the Mueller investigation was legit, is busy blacking things out, while the president is busy railing and saying and clearly not thinking the report exonerates him.
Right. You can clearly see a change in the trajectory of the Trump tweeting on this, declaiming exoneration. Now, just moments ago, going back to the 13 angry Democrats, they're leaking information. So it's clearly under his skin. You know, I was amused by the Jay Sekulow clip you played. Instead of principal conclusions, he says principal collusions. There's something Freudian going on in his mind there as well. I think what happened here is clearly there was an effort to get out in front of this, and Barr clearly assisted in this with this sort of anodyne summary here. It may not have been inaccurate. It just wasn't the whole story. And often when you have the first bite at something like this, you can change the impression in the public's mind and fix it in place. But guess what? That didn't happen here because people already had a fixed impression of the way Donald Trump and his administration behaved. So they're not inclined to believe that he was totally exonerated in the first place. And now they're in a position where this is going to come out. It's unclear how and whether it's in dribs and drabs. I mean, we can give Barr the benefit of the doubt and he gets another week, but if it comes back with all kinds of blacked out pages and all this grand jury and other information missing, then it's just going to be a long and protracted fight until it is produced.
Well, and Naveed, I think the challenge here is with a lot of people with this idea of giving William Barr the benefit of the doubt is the fact that he did do this audition to get the job, in which he was pretty clear that he didn't really believe in the investigation to begin with, or that a president could commit obstruction of justice at all. And then voila, he concludes precisely that. Let me play Adam Schiff, because I think Adam Schiff has been quite clear and very precise in the way that he's discussed this investigation. Here he is on CNN this morning.
I don't regret calling out this president for what I consider deeply unethical and improper conduct, not a bit. And I think the moment that we start to think that we should back away from exposing this kind of malfeasance and corruption is a dangerous point.
You've briefed members of Congress, Naveed Jamali, in the past on things of this nature and things precisely related to this. Is the only way that Democrats, Politico's asking, does Congress have to impeach Donald Trump to find out what actually happened? If they can't get the information by getting the Mueller report, is an impeachment proceeding left to them as the only way that the public can get an accounting? Because the public still needs an accounting here.
That's right. Gosh, I hope not. I mean, that's not the way this is supposed to work. Look, when I was lucky enough to talk to Adam Schiff, and we had a protracted conversation about what I consider the threat of Russia. And if I were to brief Donald Trump today, the way I would break it down to him is, Mr. President, you should be as scared of the Russians as you are of windmills. I mean, this is a pervasive, ongoing threat. Like the Russians, we talk about collusion, we talk about corruption. The reality is the Russians had an intent, independent of Donald Trump. And I think it's important that the Americans understand, Americans writ large understand what the Russian intention was. What did they do? What assets did they use? Were they successful? If they were successful, why were they successful? Look, even though I might be a Democrat, I believe very strongly that the FBI had a duty to protect Donald Trump as a candidate, the Republican candidate, from contact by Russians, by agents from foreign intelligence services. Were they able to do that? If so, why? If they weren't, why not? These are all questions that, independent of collusion, independent of all these charges of conspiracy, of criminality, the other part of this is, do our institutions of counterintelligence work? And if they don't, why not? I mean, this is something most Americans don't see, but they have to have faith in the institutions that were able to do this. And that's why the report has to come out. The American public don't just have a duty to understand what happened with the president, but they also have a duty to understand what happened with counterintelligence. Is the national security of this country safe? Do our institutions of democracy, are they resilient enough to stand the attack of sort of what we saw in 2016? And can we protect them going forward?
Do you think that that's what's in the Mueller report, those answers, very quickly, Naveed?
Very quickly, I think that's a large part of it, because answering those questions does not necessarily mean that Donald Trump is guilty of a crime. It does mean that the Russians were very intent on making contact with him, on perhaps even, recruiting him. I mean, these do not rise to criminality, but it is something that I'm sure Bob Mueller looked at.
I don't know about everyone else, but I sure want to know the answers to those questions. Mehdi's going to stay with us. Natasha Bertrand, Dana Milbank, Naveed Jamali, thank you all very much. And coming up, thank you. The President of the United States attacks a Democratic member of Congress one day after a man was arrested and charged with trying to kill her. More on that next.
Yes.
It's Wayfair's biggest sale of the year, and you're invited. Starting April 10th, score our lowest prices since Black Friday on best-selling furniture, decor, and way more. Plus, everything ships free on Wayday.
Everything?
Everything. And flash deals launch all day long.
Hey guys, check out the flash deal I just scored.
Our biggest sale of the year only lasts 36 hours. So shop Wayday starting April 10th at wayfair.com.
Whatever weather comes your way, WeatherTech has you covered. With our laser-measured cargo liners, no-drill mud flaps, and floor liners. Order yours today at WeatherTech.com.